If the Huron County real estate market feels painfully slow this summer, you're not imagining it. But here's what's interesting. Sales aren't necessarily the problem. Inventory is. We still had 99 sales in July, but those buyers had a lot more to choose from. Spread that activity across more listings, and suddenly it feels very quiet for individual sellers. So today we're going to look at what the July 2026 Huron County real estate market actually is telling us, why the average price jumped even though the market hasn't suddenly taken off, and where buyers might find some hidden opportunities right now. And stick around because I'm going to show you a different way to look at negotiating this market and why the situation behind the listing can sometimes matter just as much as the price. Let's start with inventory because I think this explains a lot of what people are feeling. Huron County had 6.8 months of inventory in July, down from 8.2 months in June, but still above 6.1 months we had in July of last year. And that year-over-year comparison is important. We've generally been carrying roughly 2 additional months of inventory compared with 2025 throughout this year. Months of inventory is basically a measure of how long it would take to sell the available supply at the current pace of sales. So even though July improved from June, buyers still have a lot to choose from. For sellers, that means that you're not competing with every property in Huron County equally. You're competing within your own individual inventory pocket. A rural property outside of Seaforth isn't necessarily competing with a Lake Huron cottage in Bayfield, and a family home in Clinton isn't competing with every acreage near Exeter. You need to understand the supply and the buyer activity around your specific type of property and price bracket, because that's where the real competition will be. Now, here's the number that I don't really want anyone taking at face value this month. The average sale price jumped to about $675,000 in July, up from roughly $570,000 in June. But last July, the average was closer to $697,000. So we're actually still lower year over year. The median tells us a much calmer story. It was about $526,000 in July compared with $518,000 in June and $540,000 last July. This is exactly why I always caution people about looking at 1 month average price in Huron County. With a relatively small number of sales and such a diverse mix of detached homes, cottages, farms, rural properties, and acreage, a handful of higher price sales can move that average substantially. If you're planning a move, especially if you're upsizing, pay much more attention to what's happening inside the price brackets you're actually buying and selling in. A softer market can sometimes work in an upsizer's favor if the gap between their current home and their next home has become more negotiable. Days on market also confirms that buyers are taking their time. The average was 69 days in July compared with 50 in June and 61 days in July last year. The median was around 46 days, which is another important distinction because it tells us that some longer running listings are pulling that average up higher. And a home sitting on the market isn't automatically a bad home. Sometimes there's a condition issue, but often it's simply a mismatch between the seller's expectation and what the buyers believe the value is. That's especially noticeable right now because just over 80% of July sales sold below list price. On the mortgage side, fixed rates have been fairly steady, while variable rates may offer potential savings but come with more uncertainty. There's a lot influencing where rates could go, so I wouldn't make a real estate decision based on trying to perfectly time the next move, but talk to a mortgage professional, run your personal numbers, and choose an option you're comfortable with carrying even if rates don't move the way that you'd hoped. On the mortgage side, fixed rates have been fairly steady, while variable rates may offer potential savings but come with more uncertainty. There's a lot influencing where rates could go, so I wouldn't make a real estate decision based on trying to perfectly time the next move, but talk to a mortgage professional. So when I put all of this together, I don't see a market where nobody is buying. I see buyers extremely careful with their money, and with this much inventory, they don't feel a lot of pressure to compromise. Summer is naturally slower in Huron County, but the extra inventory is making that slowdown feel even more pronounced this year. And remember that hidden opportunity I mentioned at the beginning? This is where I would build what I call a seller flexibility map. Instead of starting with how low can we offer, look at where flexibility might actually exist. What's the listing history? Have there been price changes? How long has it been on the market? Does the seller need a particular closing date? What can your agent appropriately learn from the listing agent about what's important to the sellers? 2 similar houses can have very different negotiating opportunities, so don't just negotiate the price. Do your homework, ask better questions, and negotiate the whole offer. For sellers, I'd flip that same strategy around before an offer arrives. Know what matters to you besides the price. Timing, certainty, and conditions all have value, and knowing where you can be and can't be flexible puts you in a much better position to negotiate with a buyer. The bigger picture for July is pretty simple. Huron County has buyers. What we also have is more inventory competing for those buyers, and that's creating a very different outcome from one property to the next. Cottage homes along Lake Huron, rural properties, acreages, family homes can all behave differently. There are hidden opportunities in this kind of market, but finding them requires more than watching the average price or waiting for the headline to tell you what to do. Your situation is unique. If you're thinking about buying, selling, upsizing, my contact information is in the description below. You'll also find some resources on my website to help you buy and sell, my newsletter, and more Huron County market videos. If you want to talk through your specific situation, I'm always happy to have that conversation and help you figure out what actually makes sense for you. Until then, I will see you next month for an updated report.